Fashion turned her into a goddess, but behind that flawless image was a soul struggling to breathe. Christy Turlington was not just an impeccable face on every magazine cover, nor merely Calvin Klein's eternal muse. She was living proof that the brilliance of the runway can conceal deep silences, hidden fragilities, and wounds no one sees. Who was Christy really? The model who defined the aesthetic of the 90s, alongside Naomi, Cindy, and Claudia? Or the woman who one day chose to turn her back on the industry's excesses in search of something more human? Under the lights of the fashion shows, people spoke of perfection, multi-million-dollar contracts, unforgettable campaigns. But in the shadows, insecurities were woven, pressure was relentless, and a world took shape where thinness became an obsession and youth a double-edged weapon. Christy Turlington chose a different path, to transform pain into purpose, to use her fame to speak about health, motherhood, and human rights. In that decision, a legend was born, not just a supermodel, but a symbol of resilience. This is the journey of a woman who walked between extremes, from being the most revered face of Calvin Klein to becoming a global activist. A story where beauty and fragility, fashion and purpose, glamour and sacrifice intertwine in a narrative that is impossible to forget. Christy Nicole Turlington was born on January 2nd, 1969 in Walnut Creek, California. But her childhood was not written under studio lights or along the runways of Paris. She grew up in Danville, a quiet suburban town, surrounded by a family that may not have lived in luxury, but offered her solid values and a warm, grounding environment. Her father, Dwayne, was a commercial airline pilot. Her mother, Maria Elizabeth, a flight attendant of Salvadoran origin. From them, Christy inherited two worlds: the discipline and practicality of a man accustomed to the sky, and the warmth, spirituality, and resilience of a woman who had crossed borders in search of a future. From an early age, Christy stood out for a serene beauty, one that never demanded attention, yet was impossible to ignore. Her eyes carried a blend of curiosity and quiet melancholy, as if they held questions too large for a child. She loved horseback riding, a passion that connected her to nature and offered refuge from routine. In that bond with animals, she found a sense of peace that stood in stark contrast to the frenzy she would later face in the fashion world. Her childhood was not marked by extreme material hardship, but by a persistent feeling of living between worlds. At home, her mother spoke Spanish and passed down Latin traditions. At school, Christy was the dark-haired girl with a different gaze in a predominantly Anglo environment. This cultural duality shaped a complex identity, one part deeply rooted in her Latin heritage, the other molded by the American dream. At 13, an unexpected encounter altered the course of her life. While riding horses at a local ranch, a photographer noticed her. She was just a teenager in worn jeans and riding boots, with no intention of becoming a model. Yet that moment felt like a premonition. The girl who often felt invisible was about to become the face everyone would want to see. Strikingly, within her family, the idea of modeling seemed distant, almost absurd. Her parents insisted she finish her education, keep her feet on the ground, and resist the lure of fleeting promises. Christy, obedient yet quietly dreaming, saw modeling not as a destiny, but as a possibility, an adventure that might open doors. What no one imagined was that this first shoot would unleash a chain of opportunities that would sweep her away at hurricane speed. And the shy girl who preferred the quiet of the stables would soon have to learn how to survive in a world of blinding lights and relentless demands. Her childhood, defined by duality and calm, would become the perfect counterpoint to the storm that lay ahead. Christy did not know it yet, but that blend of humble roots, family values, and rare sensitivity would turn her into a symbol of resilience when glamour revealed its cruelest face. Fate often disguises itself as coincidence. For Christy Turlington, that encounter at the ranch was nothing more than the first whisper of a path that, without her knowing it, was about to change her life forever. The photographer who saw her riding was struck by her natural poise, that rare blend of innate elegance and serenity that seemed to defy her young age. He invited her to pose for a few photographs, and though Christy treated it like a game, those images became her passport to a universe she had never imagined. Soon, local agencies began to take interest. She was barely 14 when she signed with her first agency in San Francisco. The contrast was brutal. Mornings were spent at school like any other teenagers, while afternoons took her to photo shoots, where makeup artists and stylists transformed her into a sophisticated figure. The mirror reflected a version of herself she barely recognized. Flattering, yes, but also unsettling. Balance was not easy. Her mother accompanied her to the sessions, making sure she was not swallowed too quickly by that world. Yet Christy's magnetism was undeniable. Every editor, every photographer who worked with her repeated the same phrase: "She has something you can't teach." It was calm in the midst of chaos, beauty without artifice, as if she belonged to another era. At 15, she took a bigger leap. She began traveling to Miami and New York to work with larger agencies, and there she discovered the true scale of the fashion world. Studio lights, fierce competition from girls who seemed far older, the relentless pressure to meet impossible standards. And there she was, still a student, trying to memorize math formulas in a hotel room, only to pose hours later for swimwear catalogs on sunlit beaches. Her big break came when one of those photographs circulated through the network of Ford Models, one of the most prestigious agencies in the world. Christy was invited to New York, and what began as a summer experience became the official start of her career. The vertigo was real. Suddenly, the girl from California was sharing space with the most ambitious aspirants on the planet, all willing to do whatever it took to reach the cover of Vogue. What was striking was that, unlike many others, Christy did not seem desperately hungry for fame. There was a distance about her, almost a mystery, that made her even more compelling. She did not need to fight for attention. Her presence spoke for itself. That quality caught the eye of iconic photographers and designers like Arthur Elgort and Bruce Weber, who began to include her in their most important shoots. By the late 80s, barely of age, Christy was already becoming a familiar face in national campaigns. And yet, privately, she was still a teenager who longed for normality, for horses, for the quiet of her childhood. Every time she returned to California, she rode as if she needed to remember who she truly was, as if the connection with the animal reminded her that a part of her still did not belong to the cameras. Her discovery was meteoric, but it came with an early lesson. The fashion world does not forgive innocence. Behind the scenes, she watched other girls fall into extreme diets, substances that promised endless energy, and an obsessive cult of the body. With her characteristic serenity, she tried to stay on the margins, though she would soon learn that no one emerged unscathed from that machine. The beginning of Christy Turlington was not only the birth of a supermodel, but the seed of a contradiction that would follow her forever. A deep fascination with beauty, and at the same time, the heavy cost of belonging to a world capable of devouring you without mercy. New York became the stage where Christy Turlington stopped being a promise and turned into a phenomenon. The moment she entered the international circuit, her face began to multiply across magazines and runways. She possessed something that went beyond conventional beauty, a natural elegance that echoed the restraint of the 60s, fused with a youthful freshness that pointed toward the future. In a world where many fought for attention, she stood out for the opposite. Calm, a penetrating gaze, a grace that required no artifice. The turning point came in the late 80s, when she was chosen to front a Calvin Klein campaign. Through the lens of Bruce Weber, Christy became synonymous with minimalism, sensuality, and sophistication. Those black and white images, tight jeans, a simple white t-shirt, entered fashion history. Calvin Klein did not just find a model in her. He found an icon, the perfect embodiment of simplicity transformed into something eternal. Suddenly, the doors of the world flew open. Versace, Chanel, Valentino, Yves Saint Laurent. Everyone wanted Christy. Her steps on the runway were steady and silent, as if she were floating. Unlike Naomi Campbell, whose power dominated the stage, or Cindy Crawford, whose charisma was magnetic, Christy projected something else. An ethereal, almost spiritual aura that mesmerized audiences. She was the perfect balance within what would soon be known as the Big Six: Naomi, Cindy, Claudia, Linda, Kate, and herself. Her rise coincided with the birth of the supermodel phenomenon. Models were no longer anonymous mannequins. They were celebrities, filling headlines, appearing on television, signing multi-million-dollar contracts. With her discreet elegance, Christy became a favorite of high-fashion magazines. Covers of Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Elle carried her name from one continent to another. The climax of this era arrived with the Versace shows of the 90s, when Christy, alongside Naomi, Cindy, and Linda Evangelista, closed the runways like rock stars. The audience rose, the music thundered, and the world understood that these women had redefined what it meant to be a model. It was no longer just about clothes, it was about power, culture, a global language. But a meteoric rise comes at a cost. Every day meant a flight, a photo shoot, a runway. Christy began to feel in her body the exhaustion of belonging to a machine that never stopped. The glamour of the lights concealed endless travel, lack of sleep, and the constant pressure to maintain an impeccable image. In later interviews, she would admit that during those years, she barely had time to breathe. Yet it was that same discipline and serenity, qualities that had defined her since childhood, that allowed her to survive the whirlwind. While others surrendered to excess, Christy sought refuge in practices like yoga and meditation, tools that would later become central to her life. At the height of her fame, she was already planting the seeds of something different, a search for balance that set her apart from her peers. The world worshipped her, the industry exploited her, and Christy, in silence, learned how to navigate between the two extremes. She was the supermodel everyone wanted, and at the same time, the woman who was beginning to wonder what the true price of that meteoric ascent really was. The glow of the runways seemed endless, yet behind every round of applause echoed a deep loneliness. For Christy Turlington, the 1990s were a moment of professional consecration, and, at the same time, an emotional trial that put her inner balance to the test. The fashion industry, for all its fascination, was also an unforgiving machine, demanding more than any body or mind could endure. The schedules were inhuman: non-stop intercontinental flights, 12-hour photo shoots under searing lights, fittings at dawn, and runways where mistakes were not allowed. Every look, every step, every gesture had to be flawless. The camera forgave nothing, and the message was unmistakable. If you failed, there was another model ready to take your place. In a world where youth was pure currency, Christy knew her time was limited. Barely into her 20s, she already heard whispers from agencies searching for new faces, younger and fresher. The pressure to remain relevant was constant, accompanied by extreme diets, scrutiny of every inch of her body, ruthless comparisons. Though Christy was never the most scandalous or explosive figure, she was not immune to the cruel judgments the industry imposed. Backstage life was rarely glamorous, Models crowded into chaotic dressing rooms, changing in seconds, as assistants pushed them from one outfit to the next. Makeup concealed dark circles from sleepless nights. The smile on the runway masked an unbearable exhaustion. Some girls sought refuge in endless cigarettes, others in substances promising artificial energy. Disciplined by nature, Christy tried to stay on the margins, but she was not untouched by the tension that consumed so many of her peers. The dark side of fashion was not only physical, but deeply emotional. Loneliness became a constant companion. Between flights and luxury hotels, Christy spent more time with suitcases than with her family. Personal relationships suffered, and the public image of perfection clashed violently with the vulnerability of feeling trapped in a life she had not always chosen. The cult of thinness was another demon. In an environment where every gram mattered, models lived under a merciless microscope. Although Christy was never publicly associated with extreme eating disorders, the pressure was there. Her body was examined like a product, an experience that would leave lasting marks and later push her to speak openly about health and well-being. Perhaps the most painful wound was the loss of control. Agencies decided where she had to be, what she should wear, how she must pose. Multi-million-dollar contracts were seductive, but they came at the cost of freedom. Christy, who had once found refuge in the independence of riding horses as a child, now saw herself reduced to another cog in an industry that allowed no pauses. Amid that whirlwind, Christy began to search for air in unexpected places. On one of her journeys, she discovered yoga and became captivated by the calm it offered. It felt like a return to the serenity of her childhood, now infused with conscious purpose. The practice became a lifeline, a space where she could reconnect with her body not as an object, but as a temple. The pressure did not vanish, but Christy learned to observe it from a distance. While some colleagues sank into addiction, she found in spirituality a form of resistance. That choice would mark a fundamental difference. The supermodel who had conquered the world was beginning to shape a woman who wanted to transcend fashion itself. The dark side of the industry left scars, but it also awakened in her a singular determination to never allow fame to define her entirely. And that silent battle would become the key to her transformation in the years to come. Compared to many of her contemporaries, Christy Turlington was never the epicenter of thunderous scandals. Her name rarely appeared in sensational headlines tied to excess, fights, or chaotic romances. And yet, that does not mean her path was free of falls or shadows. The difference was that, rather than exposing them to public view, Christy's struggles were intimate and silent, and perhaps for that very reason, more revealing. During the most intense years of her career, when she shared the runway with Naomi, Linda, and Cindy, Christy began to feel trapped in a paradox. She had achieved what millions of young women dreamed of: global fame, multi-million-dollar contracts, her face on every cover. But inside, a void was growing. Fashion, with its relentless pace, had begun to consume her slowly. Each runway show felt like a repetition of the last, each photo shoot a reminder that her body was merchandise. The sense of alienation deepened. It was not drugs or parties that threatened Christy, but something far more profound: emotional exhaustion. The pressure to maintain an unattainable perfection, the lack of control over her own life, and the accumulated fatigue led her to seriously question whether it was worth continuing. There were days when she looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman everyone idolized. In the mid-90s, at the height of the supermodel phenomenon, Christy stunned the world with an unexpected decision. She began to withdraw, little by little, from the industry. She turned down contracts others would have accepted without hesitation. She reduced her presence on runways and distanced herself from media excess. In an environment where every face fought to remain at the center of attention, Christy chose to disappear. The press, accustomed to explosive scandals, read her silence as a mystery. Why would one of the most desired women on the planet renounce power and money? Some hinted at internal conflicts with agencies or designers. Others spoke of existential crises. The truth was simpler and deeper. Christy needed to reclaim control of her life. A personal loss also marked this period: the death of her father in 1997 from lung cancer. The tragedy struck her with force. He had always been a pillar of stability. His passing coincided with her retreat from fashion, and rather than collapsing into despair, Christy began to rethink the direction of her existence. She understood that fame was fragile, life fleeting, and that she needed to find a purpose beyond the cameras. In contrast to her peers, who faced headlines over addictions or romantic scandals, Christy's fall was instead a strategic retreat, a turning inward. It was not a public collapse, but a private awakening. Even so, the decision carried risks. The industry forgot quickly, and her silence could have condemned her to anonymity. But Christy was not interested in keeping pace with fame. Her fall was, in truth, the beginning of a metamorphosis. A woman long defined by a perfect face began searching for a voice of her own. And in that search, she moved ever closer to activism, spirituality, and causes that would connect her to something greater than fashion. Christy's scandal, if it can be called that, was not needing scandals at all. In an industry fueled by controversy, her greatest act of rebellion was silence, the retreat, the decision to look inward. When the whirlwind of fashion began to fade from Christy Turlington's life, it left behind an empty space that many of her contemporaries filled with more covers, more contracts, more excess. She chose the opposite. She chose to stop. That silence marked the beginning of her rebirth. By the late 90s, as the supermodel phenomenon began to transition toward a new generation, Christy started to explore different paths. She had discovered yoga in her adolescence, but now the practice became a profound refuge. It was no longer just physical exercise. It was a spiritual language that gave her back control over her body and her mind. Years later, she would admit that yoga saved her life, teaching her how to listen to herself and rebuild the balance the industry had taken from her. That return to herself coincided with a professional rebirth in new forms. Christy began to appear again in campaigns, but no longer with the same veracity or as part of a machine that demanded constant presence. Her appearances were selective, deliberate, almost declarative. In 2000, she surprised the world by posing for Vogue in a session that revealed a serene, mature woman at peace with herself. It became clear that Christy had not disappeared. She had evolved. But the true turning point arrived with motherhood. In 2003, she gave birth to her first daughter, an experience that transformed her in a radical way. During labor, she faced a serious complication, a hemorrhage that nearly cost her her life. That moment did not simply mark a personal before and after. It propelled her toward a global mission. What might have remained a traumatic memory for others became, for Christy, a calling. That same impulse led her to found Every Mother. Counts in 2010, an organization dedicated to improving maternal health care for women in underserved communities around the world. Through documentaries, campaigns, and international partnerships, Christy turned her fame into a megaphone for an urgent cause. The supermodel who had once been the face of Calvin Klein was now traveling to villages in Africa and Latin America, exposing the lack of access to hospitals, doctors, and life-saving medicine. Her rebirth was not about returning to the runway with greater force, but about redefining what influence truly meant. Christy showed that beauty could be a means, not an end, a bridge toward issues that genuinely mattered. Her lectures at universities, her collaborations with the United Nations, and her documentaries on maternal health made one thing clear. Her story was no longer just that of a model, but of an activist with her own voice. And yet, she never completely abandoned fashion. From time to time, she returned to remind the world that she was still an icon. But now she did so on her own terms, carefully chosen campaigns, projects aligned with her values, collaborations that respected her pursuit of authenticity. That balance between glamour and social purpose became her unmistakable signature. Christy Turlington's rebirth was not a media spectacle, but a quiet and profound transformation. She reinvented herself not to remain desired, but to be heard. And in that choice, a new kind of legend was forged. The woman who dared to release the crown of supermodel to become the voice of millions of forgotten mothers. To speak of Christy Turlington's legacy in fashion is to speak of a style that never needed to shout in order to be heard. Unlike other supermodels whose power lay in exuberance or provocation, Christy's imprint was always one of quiet elegance, a serene beauty that never went out of style because it seemed to exist outside of time. From the moment Calvin Klein chose her as his muse, Christy redefined the aesthetic of the 1990s. She embodied the purity of minimalism: jeans, a white t-shirt, a clean face, and eyes that communicated more than any heavy makeup ever could. In an era when fashion oscillated between excess and restraint, Christy was the perfect balance. Her image did not merely shape advertising campaigns, it became a cultural symbol. Calvin Klein's minimalism would not have been the same without the ethereal presence of Turlington. On the runway, she left an indelible mark. Her walks for Versace, Valentino, Yves Saint Laurent, and Chanel are remembered as defining moments of 90s fashion. She moved with an almost priestly composure, firm, elegant, never theatrical. That way of walking became a school in itself. Many younger models cite her as a reference precisely because of her ability to convey strength without excess. Magazines elevated her to icon status as well. Christy appeared on the cover of Vogue more than a dozen times, and each appearance became a statement of style. She was not the model who changed her look to chase trends. She was the woman who made trends adapt to her aura. In that sense, she stood apart from peers like Linda Evangelista, the ultimate chameleon. Christy, by contrast, was coherence itself, always the same serenity, always the same gaze that seemed to hold a secret. Her legacy is also measured by the way she knew when to step away. While many fought to remain under the spotlight at any cost, she chose a different path. That decision was a lesson. Fashion can elevate you, but it should never consume you. In a world obsessed with youth and novelty, Christy proved that true elegance lies in knowing when to say enough. That stance encouraged the industry to rethink its relationship with its icons and opened the door for a model to transcend the runway without losing relevance. Christy was also a pioneer in introducing the notion of well-being into the fashion world. Long before words like yoga or mindfulness became fashionable in the West, she was already practicing and advocating for them. Through her example, she showed that beauty was not only a matter of appearance, but of inner balance. That vision influenced a generation of models who began speaking openly about health, self-care, and spirituality. Even her occasional returns to fashion are part of her legacy. Each time she reappears in a campaign or on a cover, it feels like a reminder. Time does not destroy a true icon. Unlike those who burned out chasing fame, Christy preserved her magnetism because she never allowed herself to be consumed by it. Ultimately, her legacy in fashion cannot be reduced to images or runway moments. It is a message. The most powerful beauty is the one that does not need to impose itself, the one that flows naturally and endures. Christy Turlington showed that fashion can be a pedestal, but not a prison, and that a model can become an eternal symbol precisely because she remained faithful to herself. Christy Turlington's impact extends far beyond the boundaries of fashion. While her face graced countless magazine covers and her walk defined a golden era on the runways, what truly sets her apart is how she transformed that visibility into a force for social and cultural change. At a fundamental level, Christy redefined the perception of the supermodel. Until the 1990s, models were largely seen as beautiful bodies in service of the industry. With the arrival of the Big Six, they became celebrities with voices of their own. Among them all, Christy was the one who chose to use that voice for something greater than advertising contracts. Her interest in well-being, spirituality, and health introduced a different conversation into an environment dominated by superficiality. Motherhood became a turning point. The postpartum hemorrhage she experienced in 2003 revealed to her the vulnerability of millions of women around the world, especially those without access to proper medical care. That experience drove her to create Every Mother Counts, an organization that since 2010 has worked to improve maternal health in low-resource countries. Through documentaries, fundraising campaigns, and global partnerships, Christy transformed a personal experience into a movement that has saved lives. Her documentary, No Woman, No Cry, 2010, was a powerful wake-up call. It exposed the realities faced by women in Tanzania, Bangladesh, Guatemala, and the United States, who endured pregnancy without access to hospitals or trained medical professionals. The film not only moved thousands of viewers, but also sparked conversations within international institutions. Christy shifted from supermodel to recognized activist, speaking at the United Nations, universities, and global health conferences. Culturally, her presence also reshaped the idea of beauty. While many models became trapped in the obsession with eternal youth, Christy embraced the passage of time with dignity. By appearing in campaigns after the age of 40, she demonstrated that elegance is not measured in wrinkles, but in authenticity. That gesture was revolutionary in an industry that had long discarded women once they crossed a certain age. Christy also became a bridge between fashion and social consciousness. She used her fame to promote messages of sustainability, responsible consumption, and personal balance. In a world where fast fashion generated massive waste and reinforced toxic standards, her voice offered an inspiring counterpoint. Fashion could be beautiful without abandoning ethics. Her cultural impact is also evident in how she inspired other public figures. Younger models such as Gisele Bündchen, Natalia Vodianova, and Karlie Kloss have followed similar paths in activism, combining professional success with social causes. In many ways, Christy was a pioneer in proving that fame in fashion could serve as a platform for transforming realities. In the collective memory, Christy Turlington is no longer only one of the great supermodels of the 1990s. She is the woman who chose to step aside, look at the world, and ask herself, "What can I give back?" That simple yet powerful question reshaped how society views models, not as untouchable idols, but as human beings capable of empathy and action. Her social and cultural impact continues to resonate. Every mother who receives care through her foundation, every young person who sees in her an example of coherence between beauty and purpose, confirms that Christy transcended her own myth. Fashion was only the beginning. Her true legacy lives in the lives she touched beyond the runways. Christy Turlington's life is, in many ways, a mirror of the paradoxes that define the fashion industry and fame itself. Within her journey coexist two opposing forces: the perfection projected in every campaign and the intimate fragility of a woman struggling not to lose herself in the reflections imposed by others. That tension between light and shadow is the essence of her story. On one side, Christy represents the absolute ideal of the supermodel: an impeccable face, iron discipline, the eternal muse of Calvin Klein. She embodied the minimalism of the 1990s with such force that her image became a cultural icon. Millions admired her as a symbol of perfection. Yet within her lived the awareness that this ideal was unattainable, even for herself. How do you sustain a beauty that time inevitably transforms? How do you remain eternal in an industry that feeds on the ephemeral? The most evident contradiction was her relationship with fame. While many of her peers thrived on it, Christy chose distance. She had everything one could desire: money, prestige, visibility, and still decided to step back. That choice baffled the public and the press, accustomed to measuring success by constant presence. For Christy, true victory lay in reclaiming control of her own life. The paradox is that by withdrawing, she did not lose relevance. Her absence made her even more legendary. Another fundamental tension was her relationship with her own body. For years, it was an object of desire, scrutinized, photographed, commercialized. And yet that same body nearly betrayed her during childbirth. The postpartum hemorrhage was not only a moment of mortal risk, but a revelation. The body the world idolized was, in truth, vulnerable. That experience forced her to rethink her relationship with her image and to transform it into a tool for social awareness. Spirituality was another field of contradiction. While the fashion universe demanded speed, superficiality, and appearances, Christy gravitated toward practices that asked for the opposite: silence, depth, authenticity. She found in yoga and meditation a form of resistance against the tyranny of spectacle. Yet she also knew that this spirituality coexisted with her status as a commercial icon, a tension that never fully disappeared. On a personal level, Christy lived the paradox of being admired across the planet while experiencing profound loneliness. Hotel rooms, endless flights, dressing rooms filled with noise but empty of genuine connection. Her life was surrounded by people, yet rarely accompanied. That contrast between public applause and private silence is one of the bitterest marks left by fame. Christy Turlington's contradictions are, in fact, the contradictions of an entire generation of supermodels, women who conquered the world, but who in the process had to confront the dehumanization of being treated as products. What makes Christy extraordinary is that, instead of being devoured by those forces, she learned to transform them into momentum for rebirth. Today, looking back, Christy does not deny her past in fashion. She recognizes that it gave her visibility, opportunity, and a place in cultural history. But she also knows that without her ability to question, to step away in time, she would have ended up a prisoner of a myth. Her reflection is clear. True freedom lies in choosing who you want to be, beyond what the world expects of you. The story of Christy Turlington is that of a woman who walked the thin line between idealized perfection and human vulnerability. She was a supermodel, a muse, a cultural icon, yet she chose not to remain trapped in that role. Her greatest legacy is not the unforgettable campaigns she fronted or the legendary runways she dominated, but the proof that true strength lies in the ability to reinvent oneself. In a world that celebrated her for her beauty, Christy had the courage to look beyond the mirror. When fame offered permanence, she chose silence. When fashion demanded obedience, she sought freedom. And when life confronted her with a defining moment through motherhood, she transformed that wound into a mission. In doing so, she moved from image to voice, from fashion icon to global activist. Her story reminds us that beauty is fragile, but purpose can be eternal. Christy Turlington remains a myth, but a different kind of myth, one that is not sustained by scandal or excess, but by coherence, balance, and humanity. In the end, the question she leaves hanging is unavoidable. What does it truly mean to be a model? To be a flawless face for the cameras, or to be a life example that inspires others? In Christy, both answers converge, and within that union lies her greatness.